Okay, everybody had a chance to look at the uh, exhibits, or the samples, I guess I should say, with the different light sources and the different goggles. Uh, I guess first I should ask a pretty simple question. Did you see anything that surprised you?
I'm always surprised when I see LCV fluoresce because I never believe it.
You saw it? Oh,
Yeah,
good.
I mean, it's on a lot of items, it wasn't, I couldn't see it, but
If you were to take uh, your print covered with blood and do a series of depletion impressions, perhaps 8 or 10, my gut feeling would be you would start to see really nice fingerprint fluorescence with LCV at about the 6th or 7th down to the last. And then, of course, it would fade out but there'd be a window there of some of the impressions where you'd get really good fluorescence. If you have too much blood, it doesn't fluoresce. As
one
I
of your
said,
samples was fluorescing really well that looked like it was maybe, I don't know if it was blood stains or spilled or just LCV. Well, no,
oh,
it
there
would
was
have
no
to
ridge
be,
detail there?
Looked like a
right, yeah,
Yeah.
it would have to be blood because it's a reaction. So, you know, there wasn't ridge detail, it was just, that one was fluorescent and it looked heavy, so I didn't know.
That I don't know. That would be a great research project for somebody actually to explore and kind of optimize the LCV in the fluorescent mode, because it works great in the color mode, but when you come to fluorescent mode, it's a different story. We've had some great examples, but it has been somewhat hit and miss. I found that the fluorescence is easier to see with the laser than it is with the light sources.
What's your optimum choices again for LCV fluorescence? Your wavelength and your filter?
Either 505 or 530 with red goggles, and the laser with orange goggles. They both work quite well. And someone asked the question earlier too, and it's a fair question and it deserves to be repeated. These are not exhibits. These are samples prepared, intended to show that material off at its best. So the DFO and the indane-dione, basically all those things were prepared not with the idea of duplicating actual crime scene experiences, but to show you how these things work when they're on, when they are working. But most of them, in fact, all of them have been vetted operationally as well, and I'm very confident. I've always had a high comfort level with DFO and indane-dione. In fact, my comfort level is now much higher with indane-dione. So I've, in my own private business, that's exclusively what I use. With regard to the blood reagents, I really like acid yellow, LCV, and amido black. But you know, there's Kumasi blue, there's Sudan black, there's merbromin, there's even LMG, which I think has some health issues. There are a lot of different reagents out there. There's Kroll's double stain, there's Hungarian red, and all of these things work. So it's not a case of whether or not they work. It's what you have in your own protocol. And of course, you always are in a position where you have to defend your choice, because a smart defense attorney may learn all those names and ask if you applied, you know, Sudan black in this particular case. And it's pretty nice to say, well, Sudan black is another stain which performs at about the same level as amido black. They both perform the same function. I use amido black. So you don't get stymied by something like that. So getting back to what we talked about earlier, the last word on this morning's presentation was acquisition. And, you know, in a lot of cases I know I'm preaching to the choir, but then it becomes a challenge to acquire these things by getting senior management on side. And I used to love to grumble about senior management, and some of it was deserved, but not all of it. And I think in terms of acquisition, there is a process that you need to learn, that we need to learn in order to get it. And to be fair to senior management, your slip is not the only one in the hat. They have a number of sections they are responsible for, and they have to allocate funds based on how well their frontline managers represent their need and the significance of acquiring that technology. And there are a number of things that are really important. One of them is writing a business case. And I wish I had some training, a seminar or something in writing a business case, because I kind of learned what I learned by trial and error. But I also hung around with some smart people, and a little bit of it maybe wore off, because if you follow, or I should say, if I followed certain rules, certain guidelines in terms of preparing a proposal, it was given a lot more weight, and I was, I'm not bragging, but I was pretty successful in getting almost everything I asked for when I was a manager. And I think it's a challenge, because our training doesn't always involve being authors or writers. That can be a missing part of the spectrum in what we would otherwise do very well. We make notes, we write forensic reports, but when it comes to preparing a request for purchase, then somehow we can get a little dyslexic at that approach, or at that stage. But I think from what I was able to learn, if the proposal is clearly identified and the significance of adopting it is spelled out based on research, you got to do your homework, and as importantly, the outcomes of not acquiring it. And remembering also that if it's not on paper, it didn't happen. So if you have a carefully prepared, reasonable, and well-worded business case, then it places a responsibility on your superior to look at it comprehensively, to look at it seriously. And if you have spelled out the consequences or the potential outcomes of not adopting that technology, as well as the potential outcomes that are good of adopting it, then that person in their role needs to look at those things, and they can make an informed decision. You might not get it, but it may mean that something else was more critical at that stage than your proposal. But there were people in my force who complained because they didn't get senior management to take their requests for acquisition seriously. And basically what they would say is, I want that, and I want it because it's good. And it doesn't work. No, you need to give people the information they need to make a responsible decision. And that in no way is meant to ignore how tight budgets are. People in the position of holding the purse strings are being asked to make impossible choices, keep everybody happy, and that's not easy to do. But chances increase when senior managers are given all the information they need to make the decision. And I found, particularly when you have a section that says negative consequences or negative outcomes of not adopting this technology. Certainly we can address things like cost savings, because that may come into it, but I've always tended to kind of steer away from that one, because as I mentioned before, I don't think we're not in the business of spending money rashly or irresponsibly, but I don't think we should be thinking in terms of the cost unless all other factors are equal. For example, people will say, well, that's too much money for a light source. Well, at what point in time did someone decide what was a reasonable amount for a light source? If you look at the fact that it might solve the murder of a 12-year-old kid, it's hard to put a price tag on that. And I don't want to get preachy about it, but just as I said, we come back to being event-driven rather than dollar-driven. Recognizing all the time that we are unavoidably dollar-dependent. Well, folks, that is the end of the structured part of this workshop. We've looked a little bit at the inception and the evolution of light sources, and some of the things that were possible, some of the things that have been done, and some of the things that continue to be done with each one of those light sources. And you've had an opportunity to see them all on the same kinds of samples. And we've talked about the pros and cons of each of those light sources. So I think we've covered all the material. And now I would open it up for discussion. If anybody has anything to add or to question or to comment on, I'd be delighted to listen to you.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Have you constructed a suggested list of the chemical or the inherent fluorescence of what your narrow band pass filter choice would be and what your wavelength choice would be, just like in?
No, that'd be a good thing to do. I haven't done that, no. I just kind of know it in the back of my head, what I've used, and I guess in terms of just off the top of my head, what I would, how I would use narrow bandpass filters is primarily on plastic bags or on paper exhibits where I have background fluorescence, and perhaps the signal isn't all that strong. And I know that that one filter, the one that peaks at 550, is ideally suited for the emission of rhodomin, DFO, and indane-dione, because they all have a broad emission. And
what about inherent fluorescence?
That's a great question too, and the same filter works for that. I just recently bought two other filters that I haven't had a chance to work with yet, peaking higher up at 570 and 580. And
what's the one you suggested again?
It peaks at 550.
Okay.
I suspect all of them, though. I'll have to do some more experimenting with it to satisfy myself. But I expect that all of them are going to be, as Ken said earlier, stacked. I think you have to use them together because that one filter will not do it all by itself. And I frankly admit I don't completely understand the physics of that, because looking at the transmission spectrum, you would think that it would be more than able to do that, but it's not. So by stacking them, you can get incredible results in some, particularly with regard to untreated prints. Huge differences.
High band, high band pass or narrow band pass? I would think.
Sorry?
On the inherent.
Yep.
High band pass stacking, right? You ever stack with high band pass? I know we could stack with band pass and narrow. Have you ever tried double high band passing?
You mean the same filter twice?
Yeah.
I haven't tried it, but my thought would be that you would increase your filter factor without changing the properties of the light getting through. Now, I could be wrong because I haven't an explanation for why the band pass itself won't work, but no, I haven't tried that.
So we were looking at the inherent prints over there, just with the coherent laser.
Mm-hmm.
And if we would have stacked the bandpass filters, we would have had better results?
I think so. There are a couple of stumbling blocks, if you like. I had another slideshow where I actually had two bandpass filters and made the ugliest pair of goggles you've ever seen in your life, which are actually stacked with laser goggles, and they're just all a mass of duct tape. But they actually have the two so that you can look in real time, I guess is the best way I can say it, and see what you're getting through both filters at the same time, because it's kind of hard to do this kind of thing, closing off one eye and holding up that filter. Sometimes what you need to do is take a photograph to see if it's worth taking a photograph. Now that's got less baggage to it now that we're in the digital world, because you simply look at your camera back and you find out quickly whether it's, you know, any point in moving on further. But the other thing to remember about this process is there is a considerable filter factor when you stack those two filters together. What that means is it's not only blocking the light you don't want in there, it's also blocking a percentage of the light you do want. So your signal is reduced. It knocks the dickens out of your background, but it also knocks back the signal, meaning you've got to boost your exposure by quite a factor. And that takes a little bit of playing with, but you can develop, I've developed a bit of a system myself that makes it, you know, less of a chore. You can jack your ISO up, and you're doing flat field photography most of the time, so you don't need depth of field, so you can drop down to an f5 or f4, something like that, and thereby shorten your exposure times. You combine those two facts with the fact that in intrinsic fluorescence, untreated fluorescence is usually fairly quiet to begin with, and it really requires careful scrutiny and careful processing, but you've seen only a smattering of the results of inherent luminescence idents over the past 30 years. There have been a lot in, there was another one I don't have slides on that happened in Texas. There's quite a number from the UK, and there's quite a number from Australia. But again, this is anecdotal stuff. What I've showed you is what I can stand behind, what are documented actual cases where inherently fluorescing fingerprints have been found and identified. Anybody have anything else to add or ask? Well, I'll conclude by saying it's been a pleasure to see everybody, some old friends, some new friends. Maybe we'll see you at a conference together sometime in the future. And safe home.